I was humiliated in the hotel lobby, in front of everyone. The manager said that people like me don't vacation here. 20 minutes later, she found out I owned the hotel. What would you do in my shoes? Describe and write in the comments what city you are from. I stepped out of the rideshare car just as the sun dipped below the Los Angeles skyline, casting a warm amber glow on the glass facade of the Grand Meridian. The building gleamed like a shrine to exclusivity, its polished steel edges catching the light like blades. A valet approached with a practiced smile that faltered the moment he took in my clothes. I nodded politely and walked past him, declining assistance with the one small bag I carried. I'd packed deliberately, and one bag, nothing flashy. A worn leather jacket, black t-shirt, dark jeans, clean but ordinary sneakers. Everything about me tonight was meant to disarm, or more precisely, to provoke. That was the point. From the outside, the Grand Meridian looked like every other five-star property I had acquired over the past decade. Immaculate landscaping, glass doors opening with a hush, uniformed doormen standing like sentinels. But I knew what lurked inside, behind the smiles, beyond the opulence. I had not come here to be pampered or greeted with champagne. I had come to listen with my eyes, to test the temperature of the waters others had described to me in hushed tones and unsent emails. As the doors parted, I was met with a burst of air-conditioned coolness and the unmistakable scent of luxury. White lilies, polished marble, and something chemical, faint and sharp, meant to suggest sterility. The lobby was a sweeping space of whiteness and quiet wealth. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks. Guests murmured over drinks near the bar. Staff glided across the marble in perfect synchrony. And then there was me. I felt the first ripple before I reached the front desk. The way one man in a tailored navy blazer paused mid-sentence. The way a woman in a designer dress lowered her sunglasses to give me a once-over. It was subtle, practiced, disapproval without confrontation. I'd walked into rooms like this my entire adult life, sometimes in a suit, sometimes in silence. Tonight, I walked in like a question they hadn't agreed to ask. The woman behind the reception desk was already watching me, late 40s perhaps, with an impeccable French twist and a smile that didn't touch her eyes. She adjusted her pearl earring before leaning forward as if to prepare herself. I knew who she was. Evelyn Thorne, general manager of the Grand Meridian for over 15 years, celebrated in hospitality circles for elevating the guest experience and maintaining standards. I had read all the awards her property had won. I had also read every internal report, the confidential complaints, the quiet settlements swept under legal rugs. Tonight, I wanted to see it unfold in real time. As I stepped closer, she lifted her chin a fraction. I was in her territory now. "Good evening," I said, calmly and clearly. "I have a reservation under Harper Equity." There was a pause, almost imperceptible, but I caught it. A hesitation that revealed itself in the tightening of her jaw, the flick of her eyes to my shoes and back again. "I'm sorry," she replied, voice smooth as glass. "May I ask if you're sure about the name? We don't seem to have that on file." She hadn't looked at the computer. I smiled, barely. "Yes, I'm sure. Harper Equity. The reservation was made 3 days ago." Still no movement toward the keyboard. Her eyes searched my face, my clothes, the weathered bag in my hand. She was building a story, and I knew exactly what it was. I could almost hear it writing itself. Wrong hotel, wrong type of guest, possible mistake. "This is a private establishment," she said finally, the smile now tight and brittle. "We do maintain a certain standard for our clientele." There it was. I let the silence hang for a moment. Behind me, the lobby continued in its slow-motion ballet of exclusivity. A group of young professionals in suits laughed over cocktails. An older white couple sat stiffly on a leather couch, glancing my way with vague unease. Somewhere, a jazz piano was playing in the background. It all felt choreographed, and I was the uninvited understudy who had wandered onto the stage. "I understand," I said, voice steady, "but I believe you'll find the reservation if you check." Evelyn's lips pursed slightly. Her eyes narrowed, not out of suspicion, but out of certainty. She had decided who I was, and that was enough for her. "I'm afraid I must ask you to step aside," she said. "I'll need to speak with security." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Her words floated just loud enough to catch attention. Heads turned. A phone was raised, casually. I could see it in the reflection of the chandelier. I exhaled slowly, quietly. This wasn't new. But it never stopped stinging. They saw my skin, my clothes, my silence, and drew conclusions. They always did. What they didn't see was the rest. The degrees, the boardrooms, the balance sheets, the fact that this building, its chandeliers, its imported marble, its pristine linen, belonged to me. I had purchased the Grand Meridian chain 48 hours ago, quietly, strategically, through shell companies and silent partners. It was a pattern I had followed for years, buying the very places that had once excluded me, reforming them from the inside. But first, I needed to know which rot ran deepest. Evelyn had just volunteered her answer. Security arrived 5 minutes later. 2 men in dark suits, both white, both built like they had once played college football. I knew the type. Trained to de-escalate, but conditioned to respond to the hierarchy of appearances. The taller one stepped forward, glanced at Evelyn, then turned to me. "Is there a problem, sir?" Before I could answer, Evelyn intervened. "This gentleman doesn't appear to have a valid reservation," she said, still smiling. "He's being uncooperative." I said nothing. I let the quiet speak for me. The shorter guard looked at me, then at Evelyn, his brow furrowed. Something in my posture, maybe, something in my eyes. He hesitated. "I'm just asking for you to check the reservation under Harper Equity," I said, evenly. "It should be listed under a penthouse suite." I pulled out my phone and held it up, the confirmation number visible on the screen. Evelyn didn't even look. Anyone can forge an email. We've had incidents before. She turned back to the guards. "Please escort him out, discreetly, if you can." There was nothing discreet about it. As they flanked me, I heard the rustle of movement behind me, guests shifting in their chairs, repositioning their drinks, leaning in with interest. The performance was no longer subtle. It was a public removal, carefully staged. I could feel the eyes pressing against my back, could almost hear the thoughts swirling. What did he do? Who let him in? I walked with them, slowly, deliberately. My heart beat like a drum in my chest, but I kept my breathing even. I had trained myself for moments like this, not just in boardrooms, but in life, in school hallways where I didn't belong, in job interviews where I was both the candidate and the test, in every space where being black meant being questioned. Evelyn followed a few steps behind, her heels clicking across the marble floor. She spoke just loud enough for everyone to hear. "We've had issues in the past with individuals pretending to be guests," she said. "It's unfortunate, but necessary to maintain the integrity of our environment." I glanced around. No one intervened. Not the concierge, not the other staff, not a single guest. Except one. In the corner, a young black woman sat with a man I presumed was her partner. She was dressed immaculately, her expression frozen between horror and recognition. Her hand found his, and they clasped fingers tightly. Their eyes met mine. A silent apology passed between us. Or maybe it was a vow. When we reached the doors, I stopped, turned, let my gaze sweep the lobby one last time. "I want you all to remember this moment," I said, quietly. "Remember how it felt to watch. Remember what you chose to do, or not do." Evelyn scoffed behind me. "Is that a threat?" I looked her in the eye. "It's a promise." And then I stepped into the cool evening air, the city buzzing beyond the glass. What none of them knew was that the show wasn't over. It had just begun. The first step outside felt like a descent, not into darkness, but into something far colder and more familiar. The night air hit my face like a slap, clean, sharp, unsentimental. The heavy glass doors of the Grand Meridian whispered shut behind me with the kind of finality that made its point clear. I stood still on the sidewalk, the distant sound of traffic blending with the muted jazz still seeping through the glass. Inside, the performance continued. Evelyn was no doubt receiving subtle applause in the form of nods, smirks, and approving glances. She believed she had done her job, protected her sanctuary, preserved the illusion. I took a slow breath, not out of anxiety, but ritual. Inhale, accept, exhale, redirect. I reached into my jacket and pulled out my phone, scrolling past the texts and calendar invites until I reached the message I had drafted but never thought I would send so soon. I tapped once, and within seconds it was out. A simple instruction. Release the acquisition notice. Internal meeting in 20 minutes. Begin termination procedures for GM of Grand Meridian, LA. I didn't stay on the sidewalk long. Standing outside the hotel I now owned, ousted like a trespasser, wasn't the kind of symbolism I was interested in sustaining. I made my way down the block, turned the corner, and entered a quiet cafe that had already closed for the night, but whose staff knew me well enough to grant me a seat in the back. A cup of black coffee was placed in front of me with silent understanding, and I sat facing the entrance to the Grand Meridian, watching through the floor-to-ceiling window. 10 minutes passed before the first phone buzzed. It was the tall man in the navy blazer who had earlier watched my removal with faint curiosity. He looked down at his screen, did a double take, then glanced up toward the reception desk. His lips parted, but no words came. He whispered something to the woman next to him, and she too checked her phone. Their postures changed, subtly but unmistakably. More people around them began to stir, the quiet murmur of confusion spreading like a ripple in still water. Inside, Evelyn was still performing, basking in her self-ordained triumph. Her smile was wider now, teeth flashing in that way people mistake for confidence. She stood near the desk, gesturing animatedly as she spoke to a couple whose pearls and gold watches served as proxies for identity. I imagined her version of the story being told in real time. The mysterious man, the suspicious behavior, her calm intervention, and swift action. She was the heroine in her tale, the gatekeeper, the enforcer of standards. What she didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that the gates she'd guarded so fiercely no longer belonged to her. I watched as Lucas, the assistant manager, hesitated behind the desk, his eyes locked on his computer screen. He scrolled, frowned, leaned closer, and then abruptly straightened. His face went pale. He turned to Evelyn, tried to catch her attention. She dismissed him with a wave, too absorbed in her story. He glanced at the lobby again, then at the screen, then back to her. I knew the moment it hit him, when he realized the name on the reservation matched the name in the headline lighting up business news alerts. My name. I stood up, left a few bills on the table, and walked calmly back to the Grand Meridian. The doors parted again for me, but this time, the air inside felt different, charged, uneasy. The buzz of conversation had changed in pitch and tone. Some voices hushed when I stepped inside. Others stumbled to maintain a facade of ignorance. The receptionist looked up and froze. The concierge adjusted his tie and looked away. Guests who had applauded silently during my expulsion now averted their eyes. Lucas was the first to acknowledge me. He stepped forward quickly, almost nervously. "Sir," he said, voice low. "Your suite is ready. I tried to tell her." I nodded. "Thank you, Lucas." I didn't look toward Evelyn at first. I wanted the silence to settle. I walked to the desk, stood in the same spot where she had performed her judgment less than 30 minutes earlier. I could feel the room tilting, perception breaking under the weight of realization. Evelyn turned finally, confused by the sudden hush, her expression flickering as she took me in. There was a beat. A pause, not of recognition but of resistance. "What is he doing here?" she demanded, half turning to Jake, the security officer, who stood nearby with his phone in hand. "Why wasn't he removed?" Jake didn't answer immediately. His eyes were on his screen. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "there's news." She rolled her eyes. "This is absurd. Just call." "He owns the hotel," Jake said. Not loud, not theatrical, just certain. The silence that followed was deeper than any I'd felt that evening. It was the kind that rewrote the air in the room, a recalibration of reality. I saw guests freeze mid-sentence, mid-sip. I heard the tiny thud of a glass being set down too hard. Someone gasped, a phone dropped. Evelyn's face twisted, as if she'd heard a word in a foreign language. Her mouth opened, but no words came. She looked at me, then at Lucas, then at Jake, and finally at the computer behind the desk. "That's impossible," she said. "He was just dressed like someone you didn't believe mattered," I finished for her. She said nothing. She didn't need to. I reached into my jacket and took out a small leather card holder. From it, I pulled one of my business cards, matte black, understated, with my name in raised silver print. "Malcolm Harper," I said, "founder and CEO of Harper Equity Group." I handed it to her. She took it like it might burn her skin. And still, she clung to the performance. "This proves nothing. Anyone can print a card." I turned slightly, catching Lucas's eye. He nodded toward his computer, where my name glowed beside the suite reservation. Another screen beside him showed the official press release, the Harper Equity logo emblazoned across the top. Guests gathered now, unable to look away. Phones were lifted, not just to check headlines, but to record. The once silent observers of my humiliation now became the chroniclers of hers. I pulled out my phone. With one tap, I was connected to our regional headquarters. My assistant, Cassandra, answered instantly. I pressed speaker. "Mr. Harper." Her voice rang clear in the lobby. "The acquisition announcement has gone live across all platforms. CNN, Bloomberg, CNBC, everyone's picked it up." "Thank you," I said. "Please patch in the board. I'd like them to hear what I'm about to say." The call clicked. Several voices joined the line, names and titles flashing across my screen. The board of directors, investors, legal, human resources. I looked back at Evelyn. "You've spent 15 years building a wall around this place. One made of assumptions and polish and coded language. But tonight, the world gets to see what that wall really looks like from the other side." She backed up a step. Her voice trembled now. "I was doing my job, maintaining standards." "No," I said. "You were upholding a tradition of exclusion and doing it with pride." I turned to the board. "This is Evelyn Thorne, General Manager of the Grand Meridian, Los Angeles. She denied service to a guest based solely on appearance. That guest was me. She refused to verify a reservation, ordered security to remove me, and made a public display of humiliation in front of dozens of guests." I paused, let it sink in. "Effective immediately, I'm requesting her termination." A voice on the line. "Head of HR confirmed. Understood. Documentation is already being prepared. 17 prior complaints on file, 6 settlements. No further review needed." Evelyn gasped. 17? "That's not, those weren't—" "They were buried," said the HR voice, "but they're recoverable." "And now?" "Admissible." The room had transformed. The marble floors that had echoed with disdain now reflected something else entirely, consequence. I looked around at the faces that had judged me, the ones that had looked away. Some were pale, some ashamed, others angry. Not at me, but at what they had almost applauded. I addressed the lobby now, not just the staff. "When you watched me escorted out, what did you think? That I didn't belong? That I was trouble? That I deserved it? That silence was the safest option?" A woman near the elevator put her phone down. Her eyes were wet. "I want you to remember this feeling," I said, "because it will happen again, somewhere else, to someone else, and you'll have a choice, to stay silent or to speak up." I turned back to Evelyn. Her hands trembled now. "I didn't know," she began. "You didn't want to know." Jake, the security officer, stepped forward. "Sir," he said, "I owe you an apology." I nodded. "You followed orders. But trust your instincts next time. You knew something was wrong." I motioned to Lucas. "Lucas tried. He'll be part of our reform team. Every staff member who speaks up will be heard. Every policy will be rewritten." And then I turned to the cameras. Tonight wasn't a mistake. It was a mirror. and we're all standing in front of it. I looked back at Evelyn one last time. Your story isn't about one night. It's about every time you thought power meant you were untouchable. And with that, I stepped back from the desk. The crowd parted, not out of fear, but respect. The same lobby where my dignity had been stripped now bore witness to its return. And the reckoning had only just begun. I didn't leave the lobby that night. I could have. The performance was over. The apology would never come. But I didn't need it. I had seen what I needed to see. The moment had unfolded with precision. A woman so sure of her supremacy that she refused to glance at a computer screen. A lobby full of witnesses too comfortable to care. But I remained. Not out of pride, not even out of victory. I stayed because that building, its walls, its air, its history, needed to be rewritten, word by word, policy by policy, minute by minute. And the rewriting had to begin now, while the sting was still alive in every corner. The guests began to scatter, quietly, nervously, each step away from the front desk, a retreat from complicity. I saw it in their posture, in the sudden need to check watches, make phone calls, or disappear into the safety of their rooms. They had come here seeking comfort, and now they were surrounded by consequence. For once, the walls were talking. Evelyn stood motionless, still clutching the business card in her trembling hand. Her face had drained of color. The pearls around her neck, that once seemed so deliberate, now looked like a costume piece from a play she no longer understood. Lucas remained at the desk, his face unreadable but still composed. He had been the only one to look beyond the surface, and now he knew why that mattered. I walked past them both without another word and moved toward the conference room adjacent to the main lobby. Glass walls enclosed the space, ensuring that whatever happened inside would remain visible. That was intentional. I gestured to one of the junior staff members, an intern perhaps, and asked her to gather the senior team. Her eyes widened, but she nodded and disappeared down the hall. Inside the conference room, I waited. The door remained open. The lobby, still buzzing with quiet conversations and the occasional news alert, pulsed just beyond the glass. I watched as the management team filed in, some pale, some confused, some trying to remember every interaction they'd had with me, every sentence that might have landed wrong, every email that now felt like a liability. None of them sat down until I did. "Let's begin," I said. They expected a lecture, perhaps even a legal threat. What they got instead was a case study. I asked Lucas to pull up the internal records on the conference screen. Reservation logs, complaint logs, settlement histories, patterns. I walked them through the data, not to shame but to educate. They needed to see what I saw when I first looked at this property on paper. They needed to feel the dissonance between the branding they sold and the experiences they created. The statistics weren't vague. 17 formal complaints filed by guests of color in the last 18 months. 6 legal settlements, all buried behind non-disclosure agreements. A staff turnover rate among minority employees that tripled the chain's average. And then there were the internal reviews. Performance assessments, filled with coded language, didn't fit the culture, lacked polish, made certain guests uncomfortable. I paused after each revelation, watching faces shift, shame settling over some, fear tightening the features of others. I knew what they were thinking, that none of this had seemed like a crisis before, that as long as the linens were crisp and the valet prompt, all was well. But now the linens couldn't hide the rot. Now the valet's precision only highlighted the selective nature of hospitality. "We have an accountability issue," I said finally. "Not just here, but everywhere. This lobby was never neutral ground. It was curated, controlled. Every interaction weighed and filtered by perception. That changes tonight." No one argued, no one moved. The glass walls of the conference room allowed us to witness the ripple effect firsthand. Guests whispering to each other, employees refreshing their phones as articles multiplied online. The story had gone viral. News vans were pulling into the circular drive, their headlights sweeping across the marble. This wasn't just corporate drama, it was a reckoning that people recognized. Because everyone had seen it, everyone had lived some version of it. I stood and nodded to Lucas. Prepare a company-wide message. I want every employee in this chain to know what happened tonight and why it matters, and make it clear. Silence will no longer be rewarded. Lucas typed furiously, already drafting, already absorbing the role that was forming around him. He had earned his place. He hadn't fixed the system yet, but he had seen it crack, and that mattered. I stepped out of the conference room and into the lobby again. The energy had shifted entirely. The air felt thicker, not with tension, but with something approaching honesty. Jake, the head of security, approached me hesitantly. "Sir," he said, "about earlier? I should have said something. I should have known." I studied his face for a moment. There was no deflection, no rehearsed corporate regret, just a man who realized too late that following orders sometimes meant enabling harm. "You hesitated," I said, "and that hesitation matters, but next time act on it. That's how change begins." He nodded, the muscles in his jaw twitching with restraint. He wasn't just embarrassed, he was angry. At the situation, at himself, at the ease with which Evelyn had commandeered the moment. Evelyn still hadn't moved from behind the desk. I could see her in my periphery, frozen in place, her world unraveling with each update, each headline, each confirmation. The guests who once praised her efficiency now avoided her gaze. The staff who once followed her orders now kept their distance. I approached her slowly, not with triumph, with truth. "You judged me based on appearance," I said quietly. "You dismissed me because I didn't look like what you expected power to look like. But you were wrong." She opened her mouth, but I raised a hand. "You're no longer in charge here, and the legacy you built, whatever you thought it was, is now a cautionary tale." I turned back to the crowd. The young black couple who had witnessed everything earlier stood near the bar. They had remained, perhaps out of solidarity, perhaps out of necessity. I walked over to them. "Thank you," the woman said, "for not letting it slide. We've been through it too." "I know," I replied. "That's why I didn't leave." The man extended his hand, and I took it. It wasn't just a greeting. It was recognition, shared experience, quiet alliance. I made my way back to the front of the lobby and stood where Evelyn had stood during her performance. The same light spilled across the marble. The same scent of lilies lingered in the air. But now, it felt like a stage reclaimed. I addressed the staff gathered around. "This lobby has seen enough curated smiles and selective service. From this moment forward, it becomes a space of real welcome. Real standards, not for how people look, but for how they are treated." Several nodded. Some looked down, but no one disagreed. A few hours later, as the media crews were ushered in for carefully managed statements, I returned to the penthouse suite, my suite, that Evelyn had tried to deny me. The room was pristine, untouched. The view stretched across the skyline, glittering and wide, full of possibility. I stood by the window, watching as flashbulbs lit up the entrance below. Reporters clamored for quotes, for footage, for a soundbite to explain the night. But there were no soundbites that could contain it. This wasn't about one man or one hotel. It wasn't even about me. It was about every person who had ever walked into a space they paid to be in, only to be told, implicitly or explicitly, that their presence was a problem. It was about a marble floor that had become a mirror. And from now on, everyone would be forced to look. 2 years later, the marble floors gleamed the same as they had that night, but everything else had changed. The lobby no longer felt cold. The same chandeliers still hung from the high ceiling, but the light they cast now seemed warmer, as though the space itself had exhaled and relaxed. I stood just inside the entrance, taking in the atmosphere that was once built on exclusion and image. The Grand Meridian, once the stage for one of the most public humiliations of my life, was now a living testament to transformation. There were voices, not hushed, not rehearsed, but real. A child laughed as he tugged at his mother's hand near the concierge. A black woman in a bright red dress crossed the floor with effortless grace, exchanging a cheerful nod with the front desk clerk. An older couple, clearly travelers, sat on one of the leather benches, sipping coffee and chatting about the city's museums. The lobby no longer filtered its guests through a lens of suspicion or expectation. It simply welcomed. Lucas Tanaka greeted me near the reception desk. His suit was sharp, but it was his posture that had changed. He no longer moved like a man asking for permission. He stood like someone who had earned his place, not through proximity to power but through understanding it. When I first met him, he was a junior assistant afraid to challenge a superior. Now, he was general manager of the flagship property in a redefined brand. "Welcome back, Mr. Harper," he said with a smile that reached his eyes. "Your suite is ready, and the entire team is looking forward to seeing you." "Thank you, Lucas," I said, and I meant it. He had taken every part of the opportunity that night and carried it forward with humility. He had enrolled in our executive equity training, not because it was mandatory, but because he wanted to lead differently. The reports showed it. Guest satisfaction among minority travelers had surged. Employee retention was up. Internal complaints had dropped to nearly zero. We walked toward the elevators together, the staff offering warm nods as we passed. It no longer felt like a script. No one was performing. They were just working. Proudly, confidently, and inclusively. As we reached the executive floor, the elevator opened to reveal another familiar face. Jake Morrison, the former head of security, now the regional director of safety and dignity standards. His crisp uniform had been replaced with a tailored charcoal jacket and a slim portfolio under one arm. "Good to see you again, sir," he said, extending a hand. "Zero incidents this quarter. Training compliance across all properties is at 99%. Guest satisfaction up. Employee morale up. Internal reporting tools are active and transparent." "And your gut?" I asked him, only half joking. He chuckled, "Sharper than ever." Jake's transformation had been one of the most surprising and meaningful. That night he had followed orders but hesitated, an instinct that, left unexplored, could have remained dormant. Instead, he embraced training, faced the discomfort of truth, and found in it a new purpose. He now oversaw equity training for every security team across our global properties. His sessions were intense, personal, and built around one core idea: safety without dignity isn't safety at all. We spoke briefly about the new properties entering our equity audit pipeline. The data was sobering. Discrimination wasn't a flaw in the system, it was the system, at least in many institutions. But the work we had done proved that systems could change. Later, I visited the office that once belonged to Evelyn Thorne. It was now the Dignity and Inclusion Resource Center. The door remained open. Inside, shelves held books on leadership, history, and justice. A quiet reading corner overlooked the garden terrace. On the wall hung framed letters from guests whose experiences here had once been tainted but were now restored. One letter, from an elderly Black veteran who had served in Vietnam, told how he had never stayed in a five-star hotel until now because he had never felt he would be welcomed. Another came from a young Latina entrepreneur who had closed her first major contract from our business lounge, no longer treated like she didn't belong. There was even a handwritten card from a family of Somali immigrants who had hosted their naturalization celebration in the grand ballroom. Each letter was more than a thank you. It was a brick in the foundation of a new legacy. I ran my fingers across the edge of Evelyn's old desk. We hadn't replaced the furniture, only repurposed it. Let it stand not as a monument to her mistakes, but as a reminder that what power builds, intention can transform. That afternoon, the young couple from 2 years ago returned with their twin daughters. They had made it a tradition to visit each anniversary of that night, not to remember the pain, but to celebrate the change. Their girls ran through the lobby without hesitation, their curls bouncing, their laughter echoing. No one stared, no one whispered. They were simply welcome. "Every time we come back," the woman said to me quietly, "we feel safer, seen." "That's how it should be," I said. Outside the hotel, a commemorative plaque now stood by the entrance. Its inscription was simple. "In this space, dignity was once denied. Let it now be honored. Always." That night, I stood once more in the very spot where Evelyn had staged her performance. The marble beneath my feet hadn't changed, but the meaning embedded in its shine had. I remembered the sting of that moment, how she had used her voice, her posture, her authority to erase mine. And I remembered how I had spoken, calm and measured, knowing what was coming. But the victory never came from the exposure, it came from what followed. Harper Equity's dignity audits had expanded to 17 hotel chains, 3 restaurant groups, 2 luxury retail networks, and a national bank. The public had embraced the initiative. People nominated businesses, reported misconduct, shared stories. We funded legal support for victims. We offered consulting for those ready to reform. We made noise, but more importantly, we built infrastructure. Cassandra, my executive assistant, met me near the staircase with her tablet in hand. "Sir," she said, "the new metrics just came in. The Hospitality Equity Initiative has processed over 2,400 discrimination reports, 94% resolution rate. We've created over 12,000 jobs, most of them filled by women and people of color. And your interview on CNN just passed 15 million views." "Good," I said. "People need to see that change isn't just theoretical." She hesitated, then handed me a letter. It was from my therapist, Dr. Angela Hill. "I watched your segment last night. I still remember how quiet your voice was when you told me about that evening, how calm you seemed while describing something so violating. You've turned that pain into purpose, that humiliation into healing. You're not just building hotels, you're building repair." I folded the letter and held it for a moment. There were still nights when I remembered how it felt to be reduced by a glance, judged by a woman whose name was stitched into the fabric of power. But those memories no longer defined me. They propelled me. As evening settled over Los Angeles, I looked out over the city from the rooftop terrace. The lights below shimmered like a constellation of lives, each person carrying their own quiet dignity, their own invisible battles. I thought of the thousands of guests who now walked into spaces where they were once turned away. I thought of every child who would never know the sting I knew because their parents refused to let it persist. Downstairs, the lobby pulsed with life. A group of international students laughed over coffee. A middle-aged gay couple asked the concierge about show tickets. An older Asian woman read peacefully near the fountain. The space didn't just look different, it felt different. It lived differently. And that, I realized, was the true legacy. It wasn't in the headlines or the policy manuals or even the reform statistics. It was in the comfort of movement, in the ability to breathe without armor, to speak without fear, to belong without explanation. As I turned to go, I glanced one last time at the plaque. The words etched in steel caught the light. Dignity was once denied. Now it was home. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Watch our next video to see how dignity and justice continue to unfold. And share this one with someone who needs to see it. Change begins with awareness.